The first time the dog appeared, Sarah Anderson nearly dropped her coffee mug. A massive German shepherd, all muscle and matted fur, lunged from between parked cars with teeth bared. 3-year-old Lily froze mid-step, her tiny hand slipping from her mother's grasp. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, yanking her daughter backward as the dog's barks echoed off morning-quiet homes. The beast planted itself directly in their path to Little Acorn's preschool, hackles raised, amber eyes wild with intensity, not attacking but blocking, challenging, refusing to let them pass. Curtains twitched in neighboring houses, doors cracked open, whispers traveled. "That stray's back again. Someone's gonna get hurt. Call animal control before it's too late." For 6 consecutive mornings, the ritual repeated, the mysterious dog materializing like a specter, creating a wall of noise and fear between little Lily and her preschool. Sarah clutched her pepper spray tighter each day. None of them could have guessed that the very beast they feared would soon reveal a truth so shocking it would change their lives forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge. Oregon wasn't the kind of place where much happened. Nestled between towering pines and rolling hills, the town of just under 5,000 souls prided itself on being a place where neighbors knew neighbors, where doors remained unlocked, and where the biggest news in the weekly Oak Ridge Observer typically involved high school football scores or fundraisers for the volunteer fire department. The Anderson family had moved to Cherry Blossom Lane just 8 months ago, drawn by the promise of safety and community after Sarah's jarring final assignment as an investigative journalist in Portland. Their craftsman bungalow, with its wraparound porch and cheerful yellow door, represented everything they'd hoped for: a fresh start, a place to heal, a sanctuary. 3-year-old Lily Anderson was a sprite of a child with unruly golden curls and eyes the color of cornflowers. Shy around strangers, but curious about everything. She collected rocks in her tiny pink backpack and spoke in complete sentences that sometimes startled adults with their clarity. Little Acorn's preschool was just 4 blocks away, close enough to walk on pleasant mornings, which had seemed like such a blessing until the dog appeared. Sarah Anderson, at 34, had already seen enough darkness to last a lifetime. Her work covering child abductions and trafficking had left invisible scars that sometimes woke her in the night, gasping and reaching for her daughter's bedroom door. These days she wrote freelance lifestyle pieces from her home office, trading hard-hitting exposés for articles about farmers markets and home organization. The change suited her just fine, or so she told herself. Thomas Anderson worked for the Oregon Wildlife Conservation Department, a gentle giant of a man whose patience with injured animals extended to every living thing. At 36, his beard was already showing traces of gray earned during years of fieldwork and, more recently, from the strain of watching his wife battle the demons of her former career. Next door lived Frank Sullivan, 72, a retired police officer whose gruff exterior hid a watchful gaze that missed nothing on Cherry Blossom Lane. His porch rocking chair gave him a perfect vantage point to observe the neighborhood, including the Anderson family and, more recently, the large German shepherd that had begun haunting their morning walks. What no one yet realized was how these lives would become entangled through the actions of a scarred, limping dog that appeared from nowhere, and a delivery driver named Jesse Reynolds, who smiled too widely when children were near. The second morning after the dog's first appearance, Sarah took precautions. She slipped a canister of pepper spray into her jacket pocket and left 10 minutes earlier than usual, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Lily skipped alongside her, chattering about the butterfly barrettes in her hair, blissfully unaware of her mother's tense vigilance. They made it halfway to Little Acorns when a low growl emerged from between the Sullivan and Mackenzie properties. Sarah's heart sank as the German shepherd materialized once again, this time positioning himself directly in their path on the sidewalk. His amber eyes locked not on Lily, but seemingly on the space around her. "Stay behind me, baby," Sarah whispered, pushing Lily gently back while fumbling for the pepper spray. The dog's bark exploded through the quiet morning, 3 sharp, commanding barks followed by a series of agitated yips. He paced back and forth across the sidewalk, effectively creating a barrier. "Shoo! Get out of here!" Sarah's voice trembled despite her attempt at authority. The dog didn't advance but refused to retreat, his barks growing more frantic when Sarah tried to step around him. "Is that beast bothering you again?" Frank Sullivan's voice called from his porch. The elderly man stood with a garden hose in hand, ready to spray. "Want me to scare him off?" Before Sarah could answer, the dog backed up several paces but continued barking, gaze darting between Lily and the surrounding area with unnerving intensity. "He's blocking our way to school," Sarah called back. Frank aimed the hose and sent a jet of water toward the dog, who dodged it easily but finally backed off enough for Sarah to hurry past, practically carrying Lily the rest of the way to preschool. "That dog needs to be dealt with," Mrs. Cooper, the preschool teacher, said when Sarah explained their tardiness. "I'll call animal control myself if it happens again. We can't have dangerous strays threatening our children." By the 3rd morning, word had spread through Cherry Blossom Lane. Thomas insisted on walking with them, carrying a baseball bat that he had no intention of using, but hoped would intimidate the animal. The dog appeared like clockwork, erupting from behind the Petersons' hedge with the same aggressive display. Thomas stepped forward, bat raised half-heartedly. "Get out of here! Boy, go on!" The dog held its ground, barking with such intensity that spittle flew from its jaws. Thomas noted something odd. The animal wasn't lunging toward them, but was perpetually looking beyond them, behind them, around them. "He's not actually trying to attack," Thomas muttered. "It's almost like he's warning us about something." "Don't you dare sympathize with it," Sarah hissed. "That thing is terrorizing our daughter." Lily, however, seemed less frightened than before. "Doggy mad?" she asked, peering around her father's legs. "Yes, sweetie, doggy's mad. We need to stay away from mad dogs," Thomas answered, finally managing to shoo the animal back far enough for them to pass. The pattern continued unbroken for days. The German shepherd, whom neighborhood children had begun calling the monster, appeared only during Lily's walks to school, never when other children passed by, never at any other time of day. By the end of the week, Thomas had called animal control twice. Both times, officers arrived too late. Finding no trace of the dog, they set up a trap baited with food near the Sullivan property, but it remained untouched. "That ain't no ordinary stray," Frank commented one afternoon as Sarah returned from preschool pickup. "Way he moves, way he posts up, that's a trained animal if I ever saw one." Sarah paused at her mailbox. "What do you mean?" Frank shifted in his rocking chair, the wood creaking beneath him. 26 years on the force, ma'am. Worked with K-9 units plenty. That dog's got purpose in his movements. Ain't random." Sarah's journalistic instincts flickered to life. You think he belongs to someone? Did once, maybe. Got the look of a dog that's seen things. Frank tapped his temple. Military or police trained, I'd wager. The way he stations himself at the same spot. Same time, that's a patrol. As Sarah processed this information, a white delivery van cruised slowly down Cherry Blossom Lane. The driver, a man Sarah had seen before but couldn't place, smiled and waved as he passed. Frank's eyes narrowed as he watched the van disappear around the corner. Third time this week I've seen that fella cruise through. Don't recall anybody ordering that many packages. That night, at a community meeting in the Oak Ridge Elementary School gymnasium, the German Shepherd became official public enemy number 1. Sheriff Callahan promised increased patrols and a dedicated effort to capture the aggressive stray. It's only a matter of time before someone gets bitten, Mrs. Peterson announced to murmurs of agreement. My Timmy won't even walk to his friend's house anymore. Thomas tried to interject. The dog hasn't actually tried to bite anyone. Yet, someone called out, are we waiting for a child to get mauled before we do something? Sarah sat silently, remembering Frank's words about the dog's behavior. Something nagged at her reporter's instincts, a pattern she couldn't quite identify, a connection just beyond her grasp. As the meeting dissolved into arguments about leash laws and euthanasia policies, Sarah found herself wondering why. Out of all the children in Oak Ridge, the mysterious dog had singled out her daughter's morning walk for his daily disruption. The following Tuesday morning dawned with a soft spring drizzle, painting Cherry Blossom Lane in watercolor hues of green and gray. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup warming her palms, watching raindrops create ripples in puddles as Thomas helped Lily into her yellow raincoat. Maybe he won't show up today, Thomas said hopefully, adjusting Lily's hood. Dogs don't like rain, right? Sarah's response died in her throat as she spotted a familiar silhouette beneath the old oak tree across the street. Even through the rain-blurred window, she could make out the German Shepherd's alert posture, head raised, seemingly impervious to the weather. He's already waiting for us, she sighed. This time, Thomas approached the dog alone first, leaving Sarah and Lily watching from the shelter of their porch. The German Shepherd's bark cut through the gentle patter of rainfall, but Thomas noticed something odd. The dog's aggressive display intensified when he tried to wave Thomas away, back toward the house, rather than when Thomas moved forward. He's trying to keep us at the house, Thomas reported back, puzzled. It's the strangest thing. After a tense standoff, they managed to circumvent the dog by cutting through the Hendersons' yard, taking a longer route to Little Acorns. Throughout the detour, Sarah felt the weight of the dog's gaze following them, his distant barking persistent until they turned the corner onto Maple Street. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat at her laptop, the half-finished article about Oak Ridge's spring garden tour forgotten as she typed trained dog behavior protection into a search engine. Page after page of information about guard dogs, service animals, and police K-9s filled her screen. She was so absorbed that she barely noticed Frank Sullivan standing at her open front door until he knocked on the frame. "Brought your mail," the old man said, extending a handful of envelopes. "Postman delivered it to my box by mistake." "Oh, thank you." Sarah took the mail, noticing Frank's gaze lingering on her computer screen. "Doing some research on our four-legged friend." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Something doesn't add up. Why only Lily?" Why only mornings? Frank's weathered face creased in thought. You know, in my day with the K9 unit, we had a dog, Belgian Malinois, named Rex, who'd go crazy whenever he sensed something wrong. Couldn't always tell what he was alerting to, but he was never wrong. The comment lingered in Sarah's mind throughout dinner and into the evening as she tucked Lily into bed. She found herself returning to her computer, this time typing in Oak Ridge missing persons and Oregon child abductions. Old professional habits resurfaced as she cross-referenced cases, mapped patterns, and created timelines late into the night. The next morning, the community's patience had worn thin. Animal control officers arrived with special equipment, heavy-duty gloves, catch poles, and a reinforced transport cage. Sheriff Callahan himself supervised as they set up a perimeter around the area where the dog typically appeared. "We'll tranquilize if necessary," the sheriff informed Sarah and Thomas as they stood uncertainly on their porch. "Can't have a dangerous animal terrorizing a neighborhood, especially one fixated on a child." Sarah found herself strangely conflicted. "What will happen to him if you catch him?" "Standard procedure, hold for 72 hours, check for microchip or identification, assess temperament. But given the reported aggressive behavior..." The sheriff didn't need to finish his sentence. The trap was set, but the dog didn't show. For the first morning in over a week, Lily's walk to school proceeded without incident. The officers waited for 3 hours before packing up, promising to return the following day. That afternoon, as Sarah picked Lily up from preschool, Mrs. Cooper pulled her aside. "I meant to mention, there's been a man asking about Lily." Sarah's body went cold. "What man?" "A delivery driver. Said he had a package but needed to confirm your address. Asked which child was yours." Mrs. Cooper's expression grew concerned at Sarah's reaction. "I didn't tell him anything specific." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Yes." "Fine," Sarah managed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Just surprised. That's all." On the walk home, Sarah noticed a white delivery van parked 2 blocks from Little Acorns, the same van Frank had mentioned seeing repeatedly on their street. As they approached, the driver, a man with close-cropped hair and a too-wide smile, waved at Lily. "Hey there. Cutie is your name, Lily. I think I have a special delivery for you." Before Sarah could respond, a familiar bark exploded from between 2 parked cars. The German Shepherd charged forward, not toward Sarah and Lily, but directly at the van. The driver cursed, scrambling inside and peeling away from the curb with a screech of tires. The dog turned back, panting heavily, eyes fixed on Lily with what Sarah now recognized wasn't aggression, it was vigilance. "He was protecting her," Sarah whispered to Thomas that night after Lily was asleep. Frank was right. That's a trained protection response. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "From a delivery guy, Sarah. Maybe the dog just doesn't like vehicles or strangers." "No. It's more specific. I've been noticing that white van around the neighborhood for weeks now, always driving slowly. Always when kids are present." Sarah pulled out a notebook filled with dates, times, and observations. "And look at this. I found 3 reports of attempted child abductions in neighboring counties over the past year, all involving a man in a delivery uniform." "That's your journalist brain making connections that might not exist," Thomas said gently. But doubt had crept into his voice. The following morning, an emergency community meeting was called. The mood in the Oak Ridge Elementary Gymnasium was tense as Sheriff Callahan announced, "We've received confirmation of a registered sex offender possibly operating in the area. His name is Jesse Reynolds, and he may be working as a delivery driver." A photo appeared on the projector screen, the same man Sarah had seen in the white van. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, the sheriff continued, "We're increasing patrols, but I urge everyone to be vigilant, especially around school zones." Amid the chaos of concerned parents, Sarah found herself searching for Frank Sullivan. The retired officer sat in the back row, expression grim but unsurprised. "You knew," Sarah said, sliding into the seat beside him. "You knew about Reynolds." "Had my suspicions," Frank admitted. "His face looked familiar from bulletins we used to get, but I couldn't place him until yesterday when I called an old buddy still on the force." He paused. "What I can't figure is how that dog knew." Later that afternoon, Animal Control successfully trapped the German Shepherd using a sedative-laced stake. Sarah watched from her window as they loaded the tranquilized animal into their van, a heavy weight settling in her chest. "We'll evaluate him tomorrow," the officer assured her. "But with his history of aggressive behavior, I wouldn't get your hopes up." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a stack of research and a growing sense of unease. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a connection was forming between a mysterious protective dog, a predator hiding in plain sight, and her own daughter's safety. The animal control facility sat on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, a low-slung concrete building surrounded by chain-link fencing and the occasional mournful howl. Sarah pulled into the nearly empty parking lot the next morning, surprising herself with her own determination. Thomas had raised his eyebrows when she announced her intention to check on the menace, as neighbors had taken to calling the German Shepherd. "I just need to see him," she'd explained, unable to articulate the growing suspicion that they'd all misunderstood the dog's behavior. "For my peace of mind, Officer Martinez," the county's senior animal control officer, met her at the entrance. "Mrs. Anderson, didn't expect to see you here. Most folks are celebrating that we caught him." "I'm not most folks," Sarah replied, following him through a door marked "Staff Only." "How is he?" "Strangest thing." Martinez led her down a corridor lined with kennels. Soon as the sedative wore off, he became a model citizen. No growling, no lunging. Took treats gentle as could be from my hand. They stopped before a kennel at the far end. Inside, the German Shepherd lay on a thin blanket, head raised alertly at their approach. Up close and contained. He looked different than Sarah had imagined, thinner, with a scar running along his muzzle and a patch of fur missing from his right flank. His amber eyes tracked her movements with unnerving intelligence. "Has he been checked for a microchip?" Sarah asked, keeping a cautious distance from the bars. "First thing we did." "Nothing." Martinez consulted his clipboard. "No collar either when we found him, though there's a mark around his neck where one might have been. Vet estimates he's about 5 years old." Sarah studied the dog, who had risen to his feet and approached the kennel door. No growling, no barking, just that same intense vigilance she'd noticed on their morning walks. "What happens to him now?" Martinez's expression turned sympathetic. "Standard procedure is a behavioral assessment, but given the reports—" "What if those reports were wrong?" Sarah interrupted. "What if he wasn't being aggressive toward my daughter at all? Ma'am, we had multiple witnesses. Witnesses who saw what they expected to see. Sarah pulled out her phone, opening a folder of notes she'd compiled. Officer Martinez, in the past week. That dog only appeared when my daughter was walking to school. Never when other children passed by. Never at any other time of day. Martinez frowned. You're suggesting he specifically targeted your daughter? Not targeted, protected. Sarah scrolled through her notes. Frank Sullivan, our neighbor, retired K-9 officer, thinks he shows signs of professional training. And yesterday, when a delivery van approached us, the dog charged the driver, not us. Her words hung in the air between them as Martinez studied the German shepherd, who sat watching them with pricked ears, as if following their conversation. I've worked with enough rescue animals to know aggression when I see it, Martinez said finally. And I'll admit, this boy doesn't strike me as naturally aggressive. But, Mrs. Anderson, even if what you're saying is true, I can't release a stray dog based on a hunch. Sarah nodded, understanding the protocol even as frustration built within her. Can I at least come back tomorrow before any decisions are made? As she drove home, Sarah's mind raced with fragmented theories and half-formed connections. She detoured past the sheriff's office, hoping to speak with Sheriff Callahan about Jesse Reynolds, but was told he was out on patrol. Instead, she headed to the Oak Ridge Observer's small office downtown. Maggie Winters, the paper's editor, and Sarah's occasional freelance boss, looked up in surprise when Sarah walked in. If you're here about the garden tour piece, you've got 3 more days before deadline. Not about that, Sarah replied, sliding into a chair across from Maggie's cluttered desk. I need access to the archives. Specifically, any stories about police K-9 units in Oregon within the last year or two. Maggie's eyebrows rose. This about that stray they finally caught. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. 3 hours later, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and printouts, Sarah found what she'd been looking for, a small article dated 11 months earlier, describing a police operation gone wrong in neighboring Grant County. Officer Michael Reeves and his K-9 partner had been ambushed while investigating a child trafficking ring. Reeves had been killed, and his dog, a German shepherd named Ranger, had been presumed dead or missing after the shootout. The article included a grainy photo of Officer Reeves and Ranger at a community event. Though the image was poor quality, the dog's distinctive amber eyes and the marking on his muzzle, what Sarah now recognized as the beginning of the scar she'd seen today, were unmistakable. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Where are you? Lily's asking for mac and cheese for dinner. She quickly gathered her research, thanked Maggie, and headed home, her mind fitting pieces together with the practiced skill of her investigative days. If the dog at Animal Control was indeed Ranger, trained to detect and prevent child abductions, and if Jesse Reynolds was part of the same trafficking network that had killed Ranger's handler, the implications made her press harder on the accelerator. At home, Sarah found Lily and Thomas in the backyard, examining a caterpillar on a leaf. She watched them for a moment, struck by her daughter's innocent wonder and the fierce protectiveness that welled up within her own chest. How different was that from what the dog Ranger might have felt? "Thomas, can I talk to you?" she called, trying to keep her voice light for Lily's benefit. Inside, she spread her research across the kitchen counter. "I think I know why that dog was behaving the way he did." Thomas listened. skepticism gradually giving way to concern as Sarah outlined her theory that the German Shepherd was a former police dog, traumatized, but still driven by training to protect children, and that Jesse Reynolds might be connected to the criminal organization responsible for his handler's death. "It's a compelling narrative," Thomas admitted when she finished. "But Sarah, it's also exactly the kind of pattern finding your brain is wired to do as a journalist. You're connecting dots that might not actually be related." "Then explain why the dog only appeared when Lily was walking to school," Sarah challenged. "Explain why he went after Reynolds specifically. Dogs can sense fear or aggression in people. Maybe Reynolds gave off bad vibes. And the timing, the selective behavior." Thomas ran a hand over his face. "I don't know. But jumping from protective stray to avenging police dog targeting a specific child trafficker is a pretty big leap." Before Sarah could respond, the doorbell rang. Frank Sullivan stood on their porch, looking grim. "Need to talk to you folks," he said without preamble. "Been doing some digging about that delivery fella, Reynolds." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Frank confirmed parts of Sarah's theory. He'd called former colleagues and discovered that Jesse Reynolds had indeed been a person of interest in the Grant County investigation that had resulted in Officer Reeves's death. "They couldn't pin anything on him directly," Frank explained, his gnarled hands wrapped around a mug. "But he was connected to the periphery of the operation, worked as a spotter, identifying potential targets." "Children? You mean," Sarah said quietly, glancing toward the backyard where Lily was still playing. Frank nodded gravely. "Word is, the operation scattered after the shootout. Went to ground. Could be this Reynolds is trying to set up shop in a new location." "Oak Ridge," Thomas murmured, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "And the dog," Sarah pressed. "Could it be Reeves's K9 partner, Ranger?" Frank considered. "They never found his body. Assumed he was shot too, or maybe ran off. Canines are known to go feral sometimes after losing their handlers, especially in traumatic circumstances." The three adults sat in heavy silence, the implications settling around them like dust. "We need to tell Sheriff Callahan," Thomas said finally. "Already did," Frank replied. "Called him right before coming over. He's putting a tail on Reynolds, but quietly. Don't want to spook him if he's scouting for targets." "And the dog Ranger?" Sarah asked. Frank's expression softened with something like regret. "That's trickier. Without proof of identity, he's still just a stray that's shown aggression. They'll complete the assessment tomorrow, but they'll put him down," Thomas finished. That night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah and Thomas argued in hushed voices about what to do next. Thomas urged caution. Let the sheriff handle Reynolds. Follow proper channels regarding the dog. Sarah, the fire of her investigative days rekindled, wanted more direct action. "We can't just sit back and hope the system works," she insisted. "Not when Lily could be in danger. Not when an innocent animal might be destroyed for trying to protect her." "And what do you suggest?" Thomas countered. "Breaking a possibly dangerous dog out of animal control, confronting a potential child trafficker ourselves." Sarah had no good answer, but sleep eluded her long after Thomas had drifted off. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, scouring news articles about Officer Reeves and Ranger, about trafficking operations in the Pacific Northwest, about the behavioral patterns of trained K9s separated from their handlers. Around 2 a, NEM. She found another article, a human interest piece about Reeves and Ranger from 3 years earlier. According to the story, Ranger had been specifically trained in anti-trafficking operations, with a unique alert behavior when he detected someone watching or following a child, positioning himself between the child and the threat, creating noise and commotion to draw attention. Exactly what the dog had been doing with Lily. By morning, Sarah had a plan. She called Martinez at Animal Control before breakfast. "I think I can prove that dog is Ranger, the missing canine from Grant County," she said without preamble. "Can you delay the assessment until I get there? I'm bringing someone who might be able to confirm his identity." After dropping Lily at preschool, Thomas insisted on taking her inside and speaking personally with Mrs. Cooper about not letting her leave with anyone but family. Sarah picked up Frank from his house and drove to the animal control facility. Martinez met them with a puzzled expression. "Mrs. Anderson, I've already started the paperwork. The behavioral assessment is scheduled for noon. Just give us 15 minutes, Sarah pleaded. "If I'm wrong, you can proceed as planned." Martinez reluctantly led them back to the German Shepherd's kennel. The dog stood alert as they approached, gaze fixed on Frank with particular intensity. "Mr. Sullivan here was a canine handler for 26 years, Sarah explained. "He knows the Grant County Canine Unit protocols." Frank stepped forward, studying the dog with a professional eye. "Ranger was trained with specific command phrases and responses," he said. "If this is him, he'll remember them." Martinez looked skeptical but gestured for Frank to proceed. Frank cleared his throat and spoke in a clear, authoritative voice. "Ranger, position Alpha." The effect was immediate. The German Shepherd's posture transformed back straight, head high, ears forward in perfect attention stance. "Ranger, shield protocol." The dog moved to position himself between Frank and the imaginary threat, a low growl emanating from his throat. "Ranger, stand down." The dog immediately relaxed, sitting and looking expectantly at Frank. Frank turned to Martinez, triumph in his weathered face. "That's a Grant County K-9 unit, no doubt about it. Those are proprietary commands, not standard training." Martinez looked stunned. "I'll be damned. I'll call Sheriff Callahan right away. We'll need to verify with Grant County, but this changes things considerably." Sarah felt a wave of vindication, quickly followed by urgency. "What about Reynolds? Has there been any update?" "Not that I've heard," Martinez replied, reaching for his radio. "But if what you're suggesting is true, that this dog has been trying to protect your daughter from a known trafficker, we need to move fast." While Martinez made calls, Sarah knelt by the kennel door. Ranger approached cautiously, sniffing at her fingers through the bars. "Thank you," she whispered, "for watching over Lily." The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to understand, his tail giving a single, tentative wag. Sheriff Callahan arrived 30 minutes later, his expression grave as he confirmed what Frank had already demonstrated. The stray was indeed Ranger, Officer Reeves' missing partner. "Grant County is sending someone to make an official identification," he told them. "But given the circumstances, I'm authorizing his temporary release into Mr. Sullivan's custody. Frank knows how to handle a police dog." "And Reynolds?" Sarah asked. The sheriff's face darkened. "That's the problem. We had a deputy watching him, but he slipped away about an hour ago. Left his apartment with a duffel bag, took back roads to avoid being followed." A cold dread settled in Sarah's stomach. "He knows we're on to him." "Likely," Callahan agreed. Which means, if he was planning anything, he might accelerate his timeline, Sarah finished, horror dawning. I need to get to Lily. Now. The drive to Little Acorns was tense, with Frank in the passenger seat and Ranger in the back, alert and watchful. Sarah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she tried Thomas's cell phone repeatedly, getting only voicemail. He must be in the field, she muttered. No reception. Sheriff sending a unit to the preschool, Frank assured her, and putting out an APB on Reynolds and his van. As they pulled into Little Acorn's parking lot, Sarah's heart sank. Everything looked normal, children visible through the windows, playing, Mrs. Cooper at her desk, parents arriving for early pickup. But Thomas's truck was nowhere to be seen, and when Sarah rushed inside, Mrs. Cooper looked up in surprise. Sarah, I wasn't expecting you until 3. Where's Lily? Is she okay? Mrs. Cooper's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Lily, but Thomas called about an hour ago, saying you'd be picking her up early for a doctor's appointment. Said he was tied up at work. The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. I didn't. Thomas didn't. Mrs. Cooper's face drained of color as she realized the implication. Oh, my God. Let me check the sign-out sheet. The signature on the sheet wasn't Thomas's. It wasn't anyone's real name, just a scrawled parent that no one had thought to question. Who took her? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. A man in a delivery uniform. Mrs. Cooper said, her voice shaking. He had a card with your name and address. Said he was your cousin, that you'd sent him because you were stuck in traffic. Outside, Ranger began barking furiously from the car. Frank burst through the door. White van just peeled out from behind the building. Ranger's going crazy. Sarah ran for her car, Frank right behind her. As she fumbled with her keys, Sheriff Callahan's cruiser screeched into the parking lot. Reynolds took Lily, Sarah gasped as the sheriff approached. Called the school pretending to be Thomas, then showed up in his delivery uniform. Callahan's face hardened as he grabbed his radio. All units, we have a child abduction in progress. Suspect Jesse Reynolds in a white delivery van. Last seen leaving Little Acorns preschool heading east. 3-year-old victim. Blonde hair. Wearing pink overalls. He turned to Sarah. We'll find her. Every officer in the county will be looking for that van. But as Sarah climbed into her car, her journalistic mind was already racing ahead. Reynolds wouldn't use main roads now. He'd take back ways. Forest Service roads, heading for county lines where jurisdiction got complicated. Frank, she said as she started the engine. Does Ranger still have his tracking training? Frank looked at the German shepherd, who stood rigid in the back seat, nose working furiously. If he's got a scent, he can follow it. But we'd need something of Lily's. Mrs. Cooper appeared at the car window, holding a small pink sweater. She left this yesterday. Will it help? Frank took the sweater and held it to Ranger's nose. The dog inhaled deeply, then let out a sharp, determined bark. That's his alert, Frank said. He's got the scent. As Sarah pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror at Ranger. The dog that had terrified her just days ago now represented her daughter's best hope. His amber eyes met hers briefly, and in that moment, Sarah felt a connection to protectors, bound by love for a little girl in danger. Find her, Ranger, she whispered. Please find her. Sarah's sedan raced down Oak Ridge's back roads, tires spitting gravel as she navigated curves with reckless determination. In the passenger seat, Frank clutched the dashboard with one hand while keeping the other on Ranger, who stood alert in the back, nose working frantically through the cracked window. "Take a right at the fork," Frank directed, interpreting Ranger's body language. "He's picking up something stronger this way." The paved road gave way to packed dirt as they entered the densely wooded area that separated Oak Ridge from neighboring Pineville. Sarah's mind cycled through terrifying scenarios, each worse than the last. How far could Reynolds get before someone spotted the van? What would he do when he realized law enforcement was after him? What had he already done to Lily? "She must be so scared," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Frank. "Kids are resilient," Frank replied, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "And we're not far behind." "Ranger's getting more excited. The scent is fresh." The German shepherd confirmed this with a sharp, insistent bark, his entire body quivering with purpose. Sarah pressed harder on the accelerator, the car fishtailing slightly on the unpaved surface. Her phone rang through the car's speakers. "Sheriff Callahan. We've got a report of a white van parked behind the old Sawyer Mill," he said without preamble. "Deputy Morales is 3 minutes out. I'm 5 minutes behind him. Where are you?" "Heading east on Forest Service Road 22, Sarah replied, heart hammering against her ribs. "The mill can't be more than a mile from here." "Sarah, listen to me." Callahan's voice turned stern. "Do not approach the van yourself. Pull over and wait for my deputy." Frank met Sarah's eyes. Understanding passing between them, neither had any intention of stopping. Not with Lily so close. "Of course, Sheriff," Sarah lied, already calculating the quickest route to the abandoned mill. "We'll wait for backup." She ended the call before Callahan could press further. "Take the next left," Frank instructed. "There's an access road that'll bring us to the backside of the mill. Used to patrol out there when kids would break in to party." The road was little more than a trail, branches scraping against the car's sides as Sarah navigated between trees. Ranger grew increasingly agitated, whining and pacing in the confined space. "He's got her scent strong now," Frank said, reaching back to steady the dog. "Remember, Reynolds is likely armed and definitely dangerous. We stay back, assess the situation, wait for Callahan if possible." Sarah nodded mechanically. Though a primal part of her brain, the mother part, was prepared to charge into hell itself to reach her daughter. The dilapidated Sawyer Mill came into view through the trees, its weathered facade standing stark against the afternoon sky. Sarah cut the engine 100 yards back, concealing the car behind a stand of pines. In the sudden silence, Ranger's low growl seemed thunderous. "There's the van," Frank whispered, pointing to a white vehicle partially visible behind the mill's loading dock. "No movement that I can see." Sarah reached for her door handle, but Frank's hand shot out to stop her. "Wait, we do this smart." From his jacket, the retired officer produced a small revolver. "Standard issue. Never turned it in when I retired. Figured there might come a day." Sarah's eyes widened. "You can't just 40 years in law enforcement, Mrs. Anderson. I know how to handle a firearm and when to use it." Frank's weathered face was solemn. "But you stay behind me. And if I say run, you run. Clear?" She nodded reluctantly. "Ranger comes with me," Frank continued, attaching a length of cord to the dog's collar as a makeshift leash. "You hang back at that pile of lumber. Give me your phone if you see anything. Call Callahan. No heroics." They moved silently through the underbrush toward the mill. Ranger leading with practiced stealth that belied his size. At the edge of the clearing, Frank motioned for Sarah to stop behind a stack of rotting timber while he and Ranger continued toward the building's side entrance. The minutes crawled by like hours as Sarah watched Frank and Ranger disappear into the mill's shadows. Her entire body vibrated with the effort of remaining still when every maternal instinct screamed at her to run inside, calling Lily's name. A sound from inside the mill glass breaking sent a jolt through her. Then another sound that stopped her heart. Lily's voice, high and frightened, calling, "Mommy." Rational thought evaporated. Sarah burst from her hiding place, sprinting toward the entrance Frank had used moments earlier. The mill's interior was a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed walkways, dust motes dancing in shafts of light from the broken roof. She paused, disoriented, listening desperately for any sound to guide her. A man's voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, too muffled to make out the words, but the tone was harsh, urgent. Sarah moved toward it, trying to place each foot silently on the debris-strewn floor. She rounded a massive piece of equipment to find herself facing a small office area. Through the grimy window, she could make out two figures: Reynolds, his back to her, gesturing wildly while talking on a phone, and Lily, sitting on a chair in the corner, tear tracks visible on her dusty cheeks, clutching her backpack like a shield. Sarah's vision tunneled until all she could see was her daughter. She crouched lower, creeping toward the office door, looking frantically for any sign of Frank or Ranger. Inside the office, Reynolds ended his call with a curse, shoving the phone into his pocket before turning to Lily. "Change of plans, kiddo. Our friends are running late, so you and me are going to take a little trip." His voice was falsely cheerful, sending chills down Sarah's spine. "Would you like that? A special adventure?" Lily shook her head, shrinking further into the chair. "Want Mommy?" "Mommy's busy," Reynolds replied, his friendly facade slipping. "Now come on. We need to—" A low, menacing growl cut through the air. Ranger emerged from behind a stack of crates, hackles raised, teeth bared in a snarl that seemed to emanate from the depths of hell itself. Frank appeared a moment later, revolver steady in his hands. "Police don't move. Reynolds." The authority in Frank's voice belied his civilian status. "Hands where I can see them." Reynolds froze momentarily, then lunged for something on the desk beside him, a handgun. In the same moment, he grabbed Lily, pulling her in front of him as a shield. "Back off, old man," Reynolds shouted, the gun wavering between Frank and Ranger. "I'll shoot the kid. I swear to God." Time slowed to a crawl. Sarah saw Frank hesitate, unwilling to risk Lily's safety. She saw Ranger poised to attack, but held back by Frank's command. She saw Reynolds' finger tightening on the trigger. And then she saw her opening. The small rock she'd been unconsciously clutching, picked up somewhere between the car and the mill, flew from her hand with surprising accuracy, striking Reynolds' temple with enough force to momentarily stagger him. His grip on Lily loosened just enough. "Ranger, take—" Frank's command cut through the chaos. The German Shepherd launched forward like a missile, a blur of fur and muscle aimed directly at Reynolds' gun arm. Teeth sank into flesh with surgical precision as 90 pounds of trained K9 dragged the man to the ground. Sarah burst into the room, scooping Lily into her arms and retreating to the far corner as Frank advanced, weapon trained on Reynolds, who was screaming in pain beneath Ranger's powerful jaws. "Ranger, hold!" Frank commanded, and the dog froze, maintaining his grip without inflicting further damage. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. "Mommy," Lily sobbed, burying her face in Sarah's neck. "The bad man said you didn't want me anymore." "Never," Sarah whispered fiercely, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her daughter. "I will always want you, always love you, always find you." Sheriff Callahan and 3 deputies stormed into the mill minutes later, weapons drawn, to find an unusual tableau: Reynolds pinned to the ground by a German shepherd who hadn't moved a muscle despite the blood seeping around his jaws, Frank Sullivan standing guard with a revolver that, by all official records, shouldn't exist, and Sarah Anderson in the corner, rocking her sobbing daughter while murmuring reassurances. "Frank," Callahan said slowly, taking in the scene, "want to explain why you're holding a suspect at gunpoint with an unregistered weapon? Seemed like the neighborly thing to do." Frank replied dryly, "Ranger here did most of the work, though." As deputies moved to secure Reynolds, who continued cursing through his pain, Callahan approached Sarah and Lily. "Paramedics are outside," he said gently. "Let's get you both checked out." Sarah nodded, unable to form words past the lump in her throat. As she carried Lily toward the exit, the little girl lifted her head. "Doggy saved me," she said, her voice small but certain as she looked at Ranger, who had finally released Reynolds at Frank's command and stood watching the deputies handcuff him. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah agreed, fresh tears spilling. "Doggy saved you." Outside, the area had transformed into a law enforcement scene: patrol cars with flashing lights, an ambulance, officers establishing a perimeter. Thomas's truck skidded into the clearing, and he leaped out, face ashen with fear. "Lily, Sarah!" He ran to them, engulfing both in a crushing embrace. "The sheriff called me, said Reynolds, I couldn't—" He broke off, overcome. "We're okay," Sarah assured him, though her voice trembled. "We're all okay now." As paramedics checked Lily for injuries, Sheriff Callahan pulled Sarah and Thomas aside. "Reynolds is part of a trafficking network we've been trying to crack for years," he explained grimly. "From what we can piece together, he'd been watching Lily for weeks, planning to abduct her for a buyer who specifically requested a blonde, blue-eyed female child." Thomas made a strangled sound, his hand tightening around Sarah's. "The dog ranger must have recognized him, or at least recognized the pattern of surveillance," Callahan continued. "That's why he only appeared during Lily's walks to school, why he created such a commotion. He was trying to scare Reynolds off and alert adults to the danger." Sarah looked over to where Frank sat on the ambulance's bumper, one hand resting on Ranger's head while a paramedic examined a cut on his arm. "What happens to Ranger now?" she asked. "Officially, he's property of the Grant County Sheriff's Department," Callahan replied. "They'll be sending someone to retrieve him tomorrow." The thought of Ranger being taken away, this dog who had risked everything to protect her child, who had persisted despite being feared and misunderstood, struck Sarah as unbearably wrong. "There has to be something we can do," she insisted. "He saved Lily's life." Thomas, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What if we adopted him? I work with the wildlife department. I could get certified as a handler for retired canines. We'd give him a good home." Callahan looked thoughtful. "I can make some calls. Speak to Grant County, given the circumstances. They might be open to a special arrangement." As the afternoon sun began its descent behind the pines, casting long shadows across the mill clearing, the adrenaline that had sustained Sarah began to ebb. The full weight of what had almost happened, what had been prevented by a dog everyone had misunderstood, settled on her shoulders. She walked over to where Frank sat with Ranger, Lily trailing behind her, unwilling to let her mother out of sight. "Thank you," she said simply to Frank. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." The old man's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Seeing that little girl safe is payment enough." He glanced down at Ranger, who was watching Lily with the same attentive gaze he'd had on their morning walks. "Besides, I think someone else deserves most of the credit." Lily approached Ranger cautiously, stopping just beyond reach. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, his amber eyes gentle as they regarded the child he'd risked everything to protect. "Can I pet the doggy now?" Lily asked. Looking to her mother for permission, Sarah nodded, her throat too tight for words. With the solemn care of a child who understands she's in the presence of something special, Lily reached out and gently patted Ranger's head. The dog's tail swept once across the ground, a measured, dignified acknowledgement. "Good doggy," Lily whispered. "Thank you for saving me from the bad man." In that moment, watching her daughter connect with the animal that had stood between her and unimaginable harm, Sarah understood something fundamental about protection, about love, about the unexpected forms that guardian angels can take. Reynolds was secured in a patrol car, his arm bandaged where Ranger's teeth had left their mark. As the vehicle pulled away, Sarah caught a glimpse of his face, anger. Yes, but also fear. The predator had become prey, brought down by the very instincts he had exploited in others. Thomas joined them, wrapping an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Sheriff says we can take Lily home now. They'll need statements tomorrow, but tonight is for family." Sarah leaned into his strength, suddenly bone-weary. "All of us," she said, looking meaningfully at Ranger. "I'm not leaving him in a kennel tonight." Thomas nodded. "I already asked. Callahan says as long as Frank vouches for his behavior, Ranger can come home with us until Grant County makes their decision." As they prepared to leave, Frank knelt beside Ranger, cupping the dog's scarred face in his gnarled hands. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "Your handler would be proud." The German shepherd pressed his muzzle briefly into Frank's palm, a goodbye, or perhaps a thank you, before turning to follow Sarah, Thomas, and Lily to their car. In the golden light of late afternoon, they drove home a family forever changed, accompanied by the most unlikely of heroes. In the back seat, Lily's small hand rested trustingly on Ranger's fur as she drifted into exhausted sleep. Sarah caught Thomas's eye, a world of understanding passing between them. The dog that had terrified them, that had seemed to threaten their child, had in fact been her most devoted protector all along. Sometimes, Sarah thought, watching the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's chest, safety comes in unexpected forms. And sometimes what we fear most is exactly what we need to save us. Night descended on the Anderson home, bringing with it a stillness that felt both foreign and necessary after the day's chaos. Lily, exhausted by trauma and emotion, had fallen asleep on the living room couch, refusing to be separated from Ranger, who lay vigilant on the floor beside her. The German shepherd's eyes tracked every movement in the room, his posture alert, even in rest. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, watching Thomas speak in hushed tones with Sheriff Callahan on the porch. Through the window, she could see the patrol car stationed at the curb, a precaution. Callahan had said, though Reynolds was in custody, there might be others in the network still at large. The reality of what had nearly happened kept hitting her in waves. Lily in that abandoned mill, Lily in Reynolds' hands, Lily being taken away to disappear forever into a nightmare Sarah had once reported on but never fully comprehended until this moment. When Thomas finally came inside, his face was drawn with fatigue and lingering fear. "Sheriff says they're questioning Reynolds now," he reported, sinking into a chair across from Sarah. "He's not talking yet. But they found evidence in the van zip ties, duct tape, a burner phone with contacts they believe are connected to the trafficking ring." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, another wave of nausea washing over her. "And Lily, what did the doctor say? Physically, she's fine. No injuries beyond a few scratches from the mill." Thomas reached across the table for Sarah's hand. "Emotionally, Dr. Bennett says there will likely be nightmares, anxiety, fear of separation. She's recommended a child psychologist who specializes in trauma." Sarah nodded mechanically. The clinical terms felt inadequate to describe what her daughter had experienced, what they had all experienced. Her gaze drifted to the living room, where Lily's small form rose and fell with steady breaths beneath a quilt Thomas's mother had made. "And Ranger?" she asked. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Callahan spoke with Grant County. A Lieutenant Morris is driving down tomorrow to formally identify him and discuss next steps." "They can't take him," Sarah said with sudden vehemence. "Thomas, they can't. Not after what he did for Lily." "I know." Thomas squeezed her hand. "I've already started making calls about adoption procedures for retired K-9s. But Sarah, we have to be prepared. He's technically police property, and he's trained for specific work." A soft whimper from the living room interrupted their conversation. Lily stirred beneath the quilt, her face contorting in distress. Before either parent could move, Ranger was on his feet, nudging the little girl's hand with his nose. The contact seemed to soothe her instantly. She settled back into deeper sleep, one small hand curling into the dog's fur. Thomas and Sarah watched the interaction in silent wonder. "How did he know?" Thomas whispered. "About Reynolds? About Lily being in danger? How did he know when none of us saw it?" Sarah thought about the articles she'd read on police K-9s, about the training that became instinct, about the bonds that transcended human understanding. "He was doing what he was trained to do," she said simply. "Protecting the vulnerable. And maybe—" she hesitated. "Maybe he was also trying to finish what he and his handler started, stopping the people who killed Officer Reeves." Sleep came in fits and starts that night. Sarah dozed in an armchair pulled close to the couch, unwilling to move Lily to her bedroom. Thomas eventually stretched out on the love seat, his long frame awkwardly folded into the small space. Ranger maintained his vigil, amber eyes gleaming occasionally in the dim light from the hallway. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah woke fully, heart pounding from a dream she couldn't remember but knew was terrible. In the disorienting moment between sleep and wakefulness, panic seized her. Where was Lily? She lurched upright, only to find her daughter still asleep on the couch, one arm now draped over Ranger's neck. The German shepherd's eyes met Sarah's in the darkness, somehow conveying understanding of her fear. He hadn't moved, wouldn't move, as long as Lily needed him. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Frank arrived early with coffee and pastries from the Oak Ridge Bakery, followed shortly by Sheriff Callahan with updates on the investigation. Reynolds had finally started talking, revealing details of a trafficking operation that spanned 3 states. "You were right about the connection to Officer Reeves' death," Callahan told Sarah as they stood in the kitchen. Reynolds wasn't directly involved in the shooting, but he was part of the same network. When he moved to Oak Ridge, he had no idea Reeves' K-9 partner had somehow followed the scent trail here. "Not somehow," Frank interjected, watching Ranger through the doorway where the dog sat patiently while Lily fed him small pieces of pastry. K-9s are trained to track across incredible distances. If Reynolds handled any of the same materials as the men who killed Reeves, Ranger could follow that scent for miles, even months later. The doorbell rang around 10, announcing the arrival of Lieutenant Morris from Grant County, a tall woman with cropped gray hair and the practiced alertness of a career officer. She faltered visibly when Ranger trotted into the hallway. "My God," she breathed. "It really is him." The reunion between Handler and K-9 was subdued but powerful. Ranger approached Lieutenant Morris cautiously, sniffing her extended hand before pressing his muzzle briefly into her palm, the same gesture of recognition he'd shown Frank. "He remembers the uniform," Morris explained, emotion tightening her voice. "We trained together sometimes. Reeves and I. Ranger was the best tracking dog in the unit." In the living room, Lieutenant Morris formally confirmed Ranger's identity through documentation, his distinctive markings, a small chip embedded in his shoulder that animal control had missed, and his responses to specific commands. "After Officer Reeves was killed, we searched for weeks," she explained. "There was blood at the scene we thought was Ranger's. Eventually, we had to presume he was dead, too. Instead, he tracked one of the perpetrators all the way here," Thomas said, the awe evident in his voice. Lieutenant Morris nodded, her hand resting on Ranger's head. "These dogs, people don't understand what they're capable of, the depth of their training and instinct." She looked at Lily, who was watching the proceedings with solemn attention from Sarah's lap. "When he recognized the threat to your daughter, his training kicked in. Protection, alert, intervention, exactly what he was taught to do." The question hung unspoken in the air. What would happen to Ranger now, Lieutenant? Morris addressed it directly. "Officially, Ranger remains property of the Grant County Sheriff's Department." She paused, her expression softening. "Unofficially, a K-9 who's been through what he has, who's been separated from his handler and surviving on his own for nearly a year. The protocol would be retirement and adoption to a suitable home." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "And what constitutes a suitable home?" Typically, the handler's family gets first option, Morris replied. But Officer Reeves had no family. After that, it would be another officer or a certified handler. She studied Thomas thoughtfully. Sheriff Callahan mentioned you work for wildlife conservation, have experience with animal behavior. Thomas nodded. I've worked with tracking dogs in search and rescue operations, though not as a primary handler. And you're willing to get certified. Take the necessary training. Absolutely. Thomas and Sarah responded in unison. Morris's professional demeanor cracked slightly, a smile warming her features. Well, I'd say a home where the dog has already demonstrated his willingness to risk everything to protect a family member meets the suitable requirement. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. I've taken the liberty of bringing the adoption paperwork. We can start the process today. Lily slid from Sarah's lap and approached Ranger, who had been watching the conversation with intelligent attention, with the innocent directness of a child. She wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. Are you going to be my doggy now? She asked. Lieutenant Morris looked to Sarah and Thomas, who nodded their permission. Yes, sweetheart, the officer answered, her voice gentle. If that's what you and your parents want, Ranger can be your doggy now. Good, Lily declared with the simplicity of absolute certainty. He keeps the bad people away. As the adults completed paperwork at the kitchen table, Sarah watched her daughter lead Ranger to the window to show him something in the yard. The contrast was striking, the tiny blonde child and the powerful German shepherd, moving in perfect tandem, a bond forged in danger but flourishing in safety. She thought about how easily it could have gone differently. If Ranger hadn't recognized the threat, if he hadn't created those morning disturbances that everyone had misinterpreted, if he hadn't persisted despite being feared and misunderstood. A chill ran through her at the narrowness of their escape, at how close they had come to an unthinkable outcome. She caught Thomas's eye across the table and knew he was thinking the same thing. Their lives had balanced on the instincts of a dog they had once considered a menace. Sometimes protection came from unexpected places. Sometimes what seemed most frightening was actually what was fighting hardest to keep you safe. The Oak Ridge Community Center hummed with tension as residents filed in for the emergency town meeting. 3 days had passed since Reynolds' arrest, and the story had exploded beyond their small town, drawing news vans from Portland and Salem. National outlets had picked up the sensational element's child trafficker thwarted by heroic police dog, but locals knew there was more to discuss. Sarah sat between Thomas and Frank in the third row, uncomfortably aware of the stares and whispers directed their way. Ranger lay at their feet, his official K-9 vest restored by Lieutenant Morris, marking him as something more than an ordinary dog. Lily remained at home with Mrs. Cooper, still reluctant to be separated from her parents but deemed too young for tonight's difficult conversations. Sheriff Callahan stood at the podium, flanked by Mayor Wilson and a representative from the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. The gravity of their expressions silenced the room more effectively than the mayor's calls for order. As most of you know, Callahan began, 3 days ago, Jesse Reynolds attempted to abduct 3-year-old Lily Anderson as part of a larger trafficking operation. Thanks to the intervention of a former police K-9 and quick action by concerned citizens, Lily was rescued and Reynolds was apprehended. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. What you may not know is that Reynolds has been living in our community for 6 months, working as a delivery driver and, the sheriff hesitated, identifying potential targets. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Reynolds has provided information on his associates in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Based on his testimony, the FBI has conducted raids in 3 states, rescuing 7 children and arresting 12 individuals connected to the trafficking ring. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the articles she'd written years ago, the statistics that had seemed abstract until now, the faces of parents she'd interviewed who had never gotten their children back. 7 children saved, 7 families spared the fate that had nearly been theirs. The FBI agent stepped forward, a slim woman with tired eyes and a voice hardened by years confronting human darkness. Reynolds was what we call a spotter, she explained. His job was to identify vulnerable targets, establish patterns, and create opportunities for abduction. The organization he worked for specializes in providing children to wealthy international buyers with specific requests. Thomas's hand found Sarah's, squeezing so tightly it almost hurt. What's particularly disturbing in this case, the agent continued, is that Reynolds selected the Anderson child not because she was especially vulnerable in the traditional sense, no family problems, no neglect, no easy access, but precisely because she matched specific physical criteria requested by a buyer. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as parents instinctively moved closer to their children. Blonde hair, blue eyes, approximately 3 years old. The agent listed clinically. The buyer was willing to pay a premium, which motivated Reynolds to target a child who might otherwise be considered too risky. How did he expect to get away with it? Someone called from the back. In a town this size, where everyone knows each other. Sheriff Callahan returned to the podium. Reynolds counted on 2 things first: the element of surprise. Most abductions occur within a narrow window of opportunity. Second, our town's location provides quick access to 3 major highways and remote forest roads. By the time an Amber Alert would be issued, he'd planned to have Lily across county lines. Sarah felt physically ill, imagining the careful calculation behind Reynolds' plan, the white van circling their neighborhood, the drive-bys past Little Acorns preschool, the rehearsed smile as he waved to children. What none of us could have anticipated, Callahan continued, was the presence of a highly trained police K-9 who recognized the pattern of surveillance. Ranger, he gestured toward the German shepherd, who lifted his head at the sound of his name, was separated from his handler during an operation against this same trafficking ring nearly a year ago. We believe he tracked Reynolds's scent to Oak Ridge and recognized him as a threat. Frank leaned forward, his weathered face creased with emotion. That dog knew exactly what he was looking at. When he saw Reynolds watching little Lily, his training kicked in, create a disturbance, draw attention, make the predator's job harder. But we all thought he was dangerous, Mrs. Peterson objected from across the aisle. He terrified the children with his barking and lunging. That was the point, Sarah found herself saying, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. He needed to create enough commotion that adults would pay attention, that we'd be on alert. He was trying to tell us something was wrong, and none of us understood. The weight of collective guilt settled over the room. How many had complained about that dangerous stray? How many had demanded animal control take action? How many had hurried past? Assuming the dog was simply aggressive, Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. I think we need to acknowledge that we, as a community, failed to recognize the warning signs, not just regarding the dog's behavior, but also a stranger repeatedly circling our neighborhoods, asking questions about our children. That's why we've asked you here tonight, Callahan added. to discuss implementing a community watch program with specific training on recognizing predatory behavior. The FBI has offered resources, and we're developing protocols for schools and daycare facilities. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with experts outlining warning signs, communication protocols, and protective measures. Parents asked questions, voiced fears, and gradually, a plan took shape, a community determined to never again miss the signals of danger in their midst. As the formal portion concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by neighbors, some apologetic, some tearful, all shaken by how close they'd come to tragedy. "We're so sorry about what happened to Lily," Mrs. Peterson said, kneeling to cautiously offer her hand to Ranger, who sniffed it politely before allowing a gentle pat. "And about how we all misjudged this brave boy." Frank stood nearby, fielding questions about Ranger's training and behaviors. Canines like him are taught to recognize patterns that might not be obvious to us. They can sense tension, fear, predatory intent. What looked like aggression to us was actually frustration. He was trying to communicate something urgent and couldn't make us understand. As the crowd thinned, Sheriff Callahan approached with a tall man in a Grant County uniform, Captain Wallace, Ranger's ultimate commanding officer. "Mrs. Anderson," the captain greeted her. "I wanted to meet the family Ranger chose to protect." Sarah felt Thomas's steadying presence beside her as she shook the captain's hand. "We're the ones who should be thanking you. If not for your department's training," Captain Wallace nodded gravely. Officer Reeves would be proud to know his partner completed their mission. He knelt before Ranger, who stood at attention, recognizing the authority in the uniform. "Lieutenant Morris tells me you're interested in formally adopting him." "More than interested," Thomas replied. "I've already submitted application for handler certification. We can provide all the documentation for the home assessment." The captain's stern expression softened. "Under normal circumstances, there would be a lengthy process, given his training and value to the department. But these are hardly normal circumstances." He produced an official-looking envelope. "This is Ranger's honorable discharge from service and transfer of ownership." Lieutenant Morris expedited the paperwork. Sarah accepted the envelope with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll give him the retirement he's earned," the captain replied simply, "and that you'll bring him to the memorial service for Officer Reeves next month. His family would like to meet the little girl Ranger saved and the dog who finished Michael's last mission." As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed Reynolds' landlady, Mrs. Finch, hovering uncertainly near the exit. The elderly woman's face was drawn with distress as she approached. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am," Mrs. Finch said, her voice quavering. "He seemed so normal, so helpful, always offering to carry my groceries, fix things around the building. If I'd had any idea—" "None of us knew," Sarah assured her, though the words felt hollow against the magnitude of what had nearly happened. "That's just it, isn't it?" Mrs. Finch's eyes welled with tears. "None of us knew, except him." She gestured to Ranger, who watched her with calm attentiveness. "Animals sense things we don't. My Henry always said dogs could smell the truth about a person." On the drive home, Sarah was quiet, processing the revelations of the evening. Thomas reached across the console to take her hand. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, just thinking about all the pieces that had to fall into place for Lily to be safe. If Ranger hadn't tracked Reynolds here, if he hadn't recognized the pattern, if Frank hadn't recognized his training, if you hadn't been willing to believe there was more to his behavior." In the back seat, Ranger sat alert, his gaze fixed on the passing streetlights, still on duty, even with his new status as a family pet. "It's like Mrs. Finch said," Thomas mused. "He sensed something we couldn't. Makes you wonder how many other warnings we miss because they don't come in a form we understand." They pulled into their driveway to find the house warmly lit, Mrs. Cooper visible through the front window, reading to Lily on the couch. The moment they opened the door, Lily launched herself at them, her small body vibrating with relief at their return. "Ranger, too," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck as soon as he entered. "Did they say he can stay forever and ever?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, holding up the envelope. "Yes, sweetheart. Ranger is officially part of our family now." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Ranger gently licked Lily's cheek, eliciting a giggle that seemed to chase away the last shadows of fear in the room. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed with Ranger lying vigilant on the floor beside her, Sarah stood in the doorway watching them. The contrast between her daughter's vulnerability and the dog's protective strength created a lump in her throat. "He won't leave her side," Thomas whispered, joining her. "Not tonight. Probably not for a long time." "Good," Sarah replied softly. "Because I don't think I could either." As they turned to leave, Sarah cast one last glance at the unlikely guardian who had recognized a predator when everyone else saw only a normal man, who had created chaos when what they needed most was to be warned, who had been feared and misunderstood while trying desperately to protect. Sometimes, she thought, safety came disguised as danger. Sometimes what we feared most was exactly what we needed to save us. 3 months later, Cherry Blossom Lane bloomed with actual cherry blossoms, their pale pink petals drifting across freshly mowed lawns. Summer approached with lengthening days and the promise of warmth after Oregon's long, damp spring. Outside the Anderson home, Thomas installed a sturdy fence around their backyard, not to keep Ranger in, but to create a secure space where Lily could play freely under the dog's watchful eye. "Perfect timing," Frank called from his porch across the street, raising a glass of lemonade in salute. "School's out next week, isn't it?" Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Friday's her last day at Little Acorns. Sarah's already planning a summer of backyard camping and kiddie pool adventures." The transformation of their neighborhood had been subtle but significant. Neighbors who once hurried past with suspicious glances now stopped to chat. Children who had feared the monster dog now asked permission to pet Ranger, who endured their attention with dignified patience. The newly established Community Watch program had installed signs at each entrance to the subdivision, and residents took turns walking designated routes during peak hours when children were coming and going from school. Inside the Anderson home, more profound changes had taken root. The doorbell rang precisely at 3 o'clock. Dr. Eleanor Bennett, the child psychologist who had been working with Lily since the abduction attempt. Right on time, Sarah greeted her, stepping back to allow the warm-eyed woman into their home. "Lily's in the backyard with Ranger." "I'll get her." "Actually," Dr. Bennett said, setting down her leather satchel, "I'd like to observe them together first, if that's all right. Their interaction tells me a lot about Lily's progress." Through the kitchen window, they watched as Lily carefully arranged stuffed animals in a circle on a blanket. instructing Ranger on his role in what appeared to be an elaborate tea party. The German Shepherd sat with perfect posture, amber eyes tracking every movement, alert even in play. His vigilance has decreased somewhat, Dr. Bennett noted professionally. Less hypervigilance, more appropriate watchfulness. That's good progress. Thomas's training with him has helped, Sarah explained. The certification course taught us how to help him transition from working dog to family pet, though Frank says he'll never fully lose his protective instincts. Dr. Bennett smiled. With what he's been through, I wouldn't expect him to. But learning to distinguish between genuine threats and normal situations is important for both Lily and Ranger. After observing for several minutes, Dr. Bennett joined Lily in the yard for their weekly session. What had begun as play therapy to process trauma had evolved into conversations about safety, emotions, and resilience. Sarah marveled at her daughter's progress. The nightmares had decreased from nightly to occasional, the separation anxiety gradually easing. Thomas returned from his fence building to find Sarah at her laptop in the home office, surrounded by notes and research materials. "Working on the book?" he asked, careful not to drip sweat on her papers. Sarah nodded, gesturing to the screen where an outline took shape. "The warning we missed how a former police dog saved a child and exposed a trafficking network. The publisher thinks it could help other communities recognize the warning signs we overlooked." The article Sarah had written about their experience had gone viral within days of publication, leading to interview requests from national media and eventually a book deal. She had initially hesitated, protective of Lily's privacy, but the opportunity to help other families, to potentially save other children, had ultimately convinced her. "Frank called this morning," Thomas said, lowering his voice though Lily was still outside. "Reynolds' sentencing is next week, 15 to 20 years, with the possibility of additional charges as they uncover more evidence from the wider network." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Justice felt incomplete, inadequate against the magnitude of what Reynolds and his associates had done, had planned to do. But it was something accountability, consequences, prevention of further harm. When Dr. Bennett's session ended, Lily bounded into the house with Ranger at her heels, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Doctor, Ellie says I'm being very brave," she announced, climbing onto a kitchen stool. "And Ranger was brave too. We're going to get ice cream to celebrate." Sarah met Dr. Bennett's eyes over Lily's head, receiving a subtle nod of confirmation. "We've been working on positive associations with Lily's experiences," the psychologist explained as they prepared to leave for their promised ice cream. Acknowledging the fear while emphasizing the successful outcome, she was afraid. But she was rescued. She was in danger, but she is safe now. "And Ranger helps with that," Sarah observed, watching as Lily carefully fastened the special harness that identified the German Shepherd as a support animal when they went out in public. "Immensely," Dr. Bennett confirmed. "He's a living reminder that protection exists, that safety won. Every time she feels anxious and he responds with calm vigilance, it reinforces that message." At Oak Ridge Creamery, heads turned as they entered, not with suspicion as they once might have, but with recognition and respect. Ranger's story had made him something of a local celebrity, his distinguished gray muzzle and alert posture instantly recognizable. "Well, if it isn't our town heroes," called Mr. Peterson from behind the counter. "What'll it be today?" Miss Lily, the usual chocolate chip?" As Lily nodded enthusiastically, an elderly woman approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Sarah. "I saw you on the morning news last month. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. My daughter's school implemented those safety protocols you talked about, and last week they identified a suspicious individual photographing children at recess." Sarah's throat tightened. "Was everyone all right?" The woman nodded. "Police arrested him before anything happened. Turns out he had prior convictions in another state." She glanced at Ranger with something like reverence. All because people knew what to look for now. Outside at a picnic table, enjoying ice cream in the afternoon sunshine, Sarah watched as Lily fed Ranger tiny licks from her cone, giggling as his tongue tickled her fingers. Thomas's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, his presence solid and reassuring. Frank joined them, easing his arthritic frame onto the bench with a contented sigh. "Fine day," he observed, accepting the cup of vanilla Sarah had ordered for him. "Saw they're putting up the new playground equipment at the park. Got all those safety features the committee recommended." The Community Watch program had expanded beyond surveillance, evolving into a comprehensive safety initiative with Frank as its passionate advocate. At 72, he'd found a renewed sense of purpose, sharing his law enforcement expertise with a town newly awakened to the dangers that could lurk in ordinary places. A white delivery van drove past the ice cream shop, and Sarah felt the momentary tightening of old fear before noting the familiar logo of a national package service. The uniformed driver waving cheerfully to customers. Some triggers remained, probably always would, but they no longer controlled her response. "Mommy, can Ranger come to my new school in September?" Lily asked, chocolate smeared across her chin. "For show and tell." "I think that can be arranged," Thomas answered, glancing at Sarah with a smile. "I'm sure your new friends would love to meet him." As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Sarah took in the scene around her daughter safe and gradually healing, her husband planning secure spaces for their future, their unexpected guardian enjoying well-earned retirement, their community transformed by shared purpose and awareness. The world remained dangerous, full of shadows and threats she now recognized more clearly than ever. But it also contained protectors, some in uniform, some in unexpected forms, some awakened from complacency by narrowly averted tragedy. Sometimes the greatest danger came disguised as ordinary, and sometimes the most powerful protection arrived in forms we initially feared. Folks, in our quiet neighborhoods where children once played freely until streetlights came on, we've grown too comfortable. We look past the strange van circling the block, dismiss the uneasy feeling when someone asks too many questions about our grandchildren. This story of little Lily and the misunderstood German Shepherd reminds us of a wisdom we've somehow forgotten, that sometimes warnings come in forms we don't recognize. Remember when we trusted our instincts, when we noticed things out of place. In our rush to believe the world is still as safe as when we raised our children, we've stopped seeing the dangers hiding in plain sight. But like Frank Sullivan, we carry decades of life experience that younger folks haven't earned yet.